We are now starting our second session, and I have the honor to invite Dr. Chris Demchak. She's a Rear Admiral Grace M. Hopper Professor of Cybersecurity and co-director of a Center for Cyber Conflict Studies, Strategic Research Department, U.S. Naval War College. Her research and many publications address global cyber's influences from a rising cyber Westphalia to the security complex socio-technical economic systems. Please.
Thank you. So after that wonderful talk, mine is going to take you to a different place. I'm going to talk about a challenge I was given a couple of years ago. I do socio-technical economic systems and surprise, and I always look at security. And I was asked once, what would political and economic coercion look like in a cybered world, given what we characterize? So what I'm going to do is just talk as briefly as I can. Like all academics, I've only got about 100 slides, so what I urge you to do is listen to me, and if you like it, I can send you the slides later on, if that works, or not. Okay. Never mind, don't be, I'll just hit enter, I can do that. I'm going to take you to a slightly different place. I come from a different place, although I do security studies. I start as someone who once programmed, once did biochemistry, so you know I'm tainted from the beginning. And I'm going to give you a different interpretation of cyberspace. I'm then going to walk you to why that means there's a different way to think about coercion in large-scale systems. And then when you're as depressed as possible at the end, I'll give you what I think is a solution, or at least part of one to think about. I already told you about my background, but I basically am fixated on large-scale systems and what people can do to them. And then once they do them, most particularly, what people do afterwards when they're surprised. Basically, I look at the complexity of organizations, of technology, and then economies, and then when they blow up, what happens after that. Just for your interest, I'm also doing long-term research on comparative cyber commands and national equivalents. So I'm interested in how people learn and how they structure their organizations comparatively afterwards. I'm going to change the language for you for a few minutes as quickly as possible. One, cyberspace, with all due respect to the U.S. government, is not a domain. It is a substrate. It's better thought of that way, and it's one that grew up under our feet. For those of us who are older than dirt, you may recall in the 1990s, we were teaching cyberspace for poets. I, in particular, was. And the internet was a cloud, right? All innocent. Information wants to be free. No bad guys out there. Unfortunately, we didn't realize that what we were doing is linking up a bunch of socio-technical economic systems with their different cultures, with their different needs. And we were systemically changing the character of human competition by linking those things to things that mattered. In 1998, it didn't matter as much that you could reach into banks. It does now. More importantly, for people who do conflict or others, we did not realize at the time we changed the character of conflict. Until now, throughout history, if you really wanted to hit somebody a long way away, you had to be either a superpower, an emperor, or a close neighbor. Now what we've done is we've changed systemically three aspects: scale, proximity, and precision. From here on out, you can be nearly no one, and you can organize a scale of organization, 5 to 5,000 people. You don't even need to know them or pay them. Or you can use bots. Secondly, you don't need to be anywhere near them to get what we used to consider high-level intelligence about what matters, what they're vulnerable to, and what you can get from them. Thirdly, you can pick all the tools you want. In the history, you had to build the tanks. People could see you build the tanks, and they might have 6 months to figure out how to build a tank. Now, you can build it, you can buy it, you can work it on the weekend, you can attack him, Ghana, me, four universities, and go home for lunch and keep it going. This is a fundamental change. This is a fundamental change to the way people compete. And at the university, I'm at a university, but at the U.S. Naval War College, we call this cyber conflict. By the way, for those of you, you notice it's an adjective. Because if we're still talking about it as if it's something weird in 10 years, we've failed. So we're ahead of the game. We said, we're giving it an adjective. You can dump it later. It will always be with us. Cyber conflict doesn't require you to declare war. It's a spectrum. Because of this drop, these hindrances, these advantages now given, it is a spectrum between peace and war. In our work, we leave the word cyber war to the end of the spectrum. At the end of the spectrum, because it's inefficient. You can get most of what you want before you go to something kinetic and throwing at people. I know Israel has a slightly different position in that, but you have close neighbors. So, okay, somewhere in between. I don't need to tell you this. If you're here, you already know that the global cybercrime market is enormous. It's also what I call the innovation lab of the world. Most governments use tools that are first tested, developed, functional, and for sale in the global cybercrime market. One of the other things we know for an organization theorist is you know how good they're getting because they're organizing and they're specializing, and now people actually specialize in what they do in that market. It provides you everything from proxies to moonlighters to everything else. Back to gravitas. In socio-technical systems, what we're really saying is not only can you hit people harder at great distance, but you are now, as a nation, facing 4 levels of complex system surprises. The first 2 are the ones from the old socio-technical systems literature. The single organization, those complexities connect, and when they connect, you then have surprises, rogue outcomes. 5 to 20% of your outcomes will be things you could not know in advance in form or frequency. When you then connect those organizations together in critical infrastructure, again you have these, and now you have to work together in order to figure out what each other has because you're connected. That's without mentioning cyberspace as a global substrate. When you add it as a global substrate, you add a 3rd layer of surprise, what we call the bad actors. High volume, not terribly well skilled. If you take 100% of all the bad actors working in cyberspace of the world, 80% of them, right? But there's worse. There's a final layer. In our language, we call them the wicked actors, from the concept in mathematics of wicked problems. These are the very scary guys that if they know what you're defending with, they'll get in. They're a small proportion, but they're the ones that are usually state-sponsored or large-scale organization sponsors. The losses, economically, can no longer be ignored. We know this, and we also know that we now are getting numbers on it. People have been challenging. Where does it matter? Well, of course, you know that the U.S., the head of Cyber Command called it the greatest transfer of wealth in human history. The French call it the pillaging of their economy. But now we have actual numbers, specifically from the Netherlands. They did a research between their 2011 first cybersecurity strategy to their 2013, and in the interim, they discovered that the losses due to cybersecurity in 2010 had halved their GDP growth. Estimates for the U.S. are 1% off GDP, maybe more. We don't know because they don't tell us. Whereas in Holland, they talk to each other.
But what? I mean, how is it measured? I mean, in what sense?
The companies get together with their senior, and this is how it did it in Holland. They got together and they actually said, this is what we're spending, this is what we estimate as our losses, and this is what they put together in that data. That's what they're chasing. We don't get that data because in the U.S. we don't get as much of that data because it's just not shared with us. That's a difference, but they're much more cooperativist, so they're willing to do that. If you move north towards Sweden and Norway, they get even more cooperativist.
So it's the amount of money that you have to...
You have to spend, and you lose. What you estimate is you lose and what you spend. They did a market as well.
What's the loss? I mean, the spending, I understand, but what's the loss?
They estimated as market loss is what they estimated. Yeah. So what is happening? Well, governments can't stop. If you do socio-technical systems, one of the things you know is one of the 3 things almost always is necessary when you're facing surprise: redundancy in knowledge, slack in time, or discovery, trial, and error learning. Throughout history, the cheapest thing to do, slack in time. We do this all the time. Push it out as far away as you can. Without wanting to break up anyone's internet, the reality is you will be facing a bordered cyberspace. It's already begun. This is what we call the cyber Westphalia. Whether or not it's perfect, whether or not they do it well, I will tell you that governments already are doing it and will do it. And we can talk, if you want to catch me, about the other kinds of things that are happening. It's already, there are going to be cyber jurisdictions, and as a side note, thanks to my colleague Rafael Rosinski, one of the things you can know is that everyone who's ever had a PTT or a National Telecommunications Agency is probably going to use that. These institutional models are part of how cyber coercion begins to develop. It's hard to coerce masses of people. It's much easier to coerce groups of people that are organized. Okay? Already we see organizations occurring at all 4 layers everywhere, but they're in pieces. Nearly no one is on every layer creating effective organizations. Okay? Now, you need to see all of this. One of the difficulties we have is that this kind of difference, these challenges might have occurred in globalization terms over maybe 3 generations. They've occurred so fast that it's extremely difficult for the defender nations to understand what they cannot control anymore. The pre-cyber rules, including coercion, are changing underneath our feet. And this is as the centers of economic and demographic power move to Asia. Right? And as we consolidate, coercion will rise. If you were taught in the last 20 years as someone who did international relations, you will learn that there was a place and time where we had high politics and low politics. High politics is where nuclear things and war happens, and low politics is where basically economics happens. We now have a blend of high and low politics, thank you to the substrate. And furthermore, they're tightly coupled, meaning that the future, the path dependence of your socio-technical economic system is deeply influenced by what transits out of your control. It turns out that it's much easier to force a country or its senior leaders to listen to you if you can remove their economic vibrancy. That matters. And therefore, people are moving to thinking about it. More than thinking about it, they're acting on it. Argument is you won't see as much kinetic display. Again, with exceptions to Israel. You've got different neighbors than some people. All right, coercion. What are the characteristics of cyber coercion? Traditionally, coercion is focused on military force and awareness. I have a tank, as if you noticed it, and I want you to do something, it's me. I want this behavior. My argument is in the future that what you will see more likely is what's called deception and opaqueness. Deception means I have the tools, but I don't want you to know what those tools are, because the cybercrime market is going to give you an opportunity to basically make my investment useless in a very short period of time. Secondly, I don't want you to know it's me. Because if you know it's me, you can reach behind me into one of those 4 layers of surprise and you can make my life miserable. And I don't want you to do that. And it doesn't matter whether I'm an organization, and it doesn't matter whether I'm a country. I don't want you to. So what happens is coercion occurs as shaping systems versus system using deception and opaqueness. Even the questions you ask when you are conducting a coercive campaign changes when you are moving into a deeply cybered world. Basically, you're going to want to make sure, as I think Sun Tzu once said, you make them an offer they can't refuse because all the other options are already closed, if you can do it. Okay?
Godfather, not Sun Tzu.
I know. I decided that I would see if people knew. Sun Tzu also says all war is deception, so it's another distance entirely. All right, so how are we going to be overwhelmed? Overwhelmed by scale. Centers of demographic and economic power are moving to the east. News flash, you will not be able to resist the coercion if it comes at you at a 20% off of whatever technology you happen to want, and your economic leaders in your country say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay the 100%, which is more secure, because the 20% is cheaper. The 80% is cheaper for me. They can last a very long time, these coercion campaigns. You are working on their resilience, and that may take time, but that's all right, because remember, you can do it on weekends, night times, use different tools, play around for a while, make money in the interim, and you can also dedicate it to whether or not you want to stop their ability to respond, or you want to work on basically their resilience. 2 kinds of campaigns. Right? A little bit of gravitas. Cyber power. We talk about cyber power as a misunderstanding of cyber power as what you do externally. Cyber power in a socio-technical economic system has two pieces, resilience and disruption. Tailored disruption, resilience. The first three layers of a socio-technical economic system, that's your resilience. The last one, the very last one, where the wicked actors are, is your forward disruption. Never forget the fact that you have a cyber command does not mean that by any chance you are a cyber power. Nor does it mean that if you have only resilience, you can be a cyber power. You have to play in both of these fields across all four layers. It's hard to be a cyber power. Not only do you have to have representation in all four layers, there are certain things you have to do and not do. And there's a literature on this, the socio-technical systems, and there's a lot of empirical work on this as well. There are no robust cyber powers today, and they are not going to be guaranteed for any of us, neither for the wealthy nor the non-wealthy in the future. And there's no particularly effective responses at the moment across all four. So now, after I've depressed you, I'm going to leave you with the recommendation. You can't go it alone, but neither can you go with everybody. And I'm willing to take on anyone who wants to talk about multi-stakeholder across the world. We're all going to do norms and rules. If you do organization theory, the one thing you know is norms come from shared daily practices. If you aren't already doing it and you can't hold a gun to their head, they're not going to do it. This is kind of how it works. I don't mean a gun. Maybe incentives of some kind. This will be so military. So, nonetheless, you can't go it alone. It's very hard to become that cyber power alone. So you do need to work with the like-minded. The interesting thing about allies, if you already are close allies, odds are you know how to communicate with each other. I spent 11 years teaching international management. I will tell you there is two completely different kinds of communication styles that go on in the world. So if you already are an ally, odds are you know how to communicate across that. It also means that you have a better chance of sharing the collective sense-making that comes from, remember that second layer? Organizations that are peers and equivalents, and they present for each other either vulnerabilities or sensor sets or technical capacity. You have a better chance of connecting with those folks, and therefore you have a better chance of sharing the one thing you should be able to share, which is resilience. So you can think about having a collective resilience response, which helps you along the way. Now, why does this matter now? You can't do this if you don't start designing your organizations to share from the beginning. Why? Because organizations last a long time. So you have to start thinking that at some point, I want to be able to share resilience. What do we do now to get there as shared daily practices later? So finally, paraphrasing a famous American, thank you.